wow. Hello. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Miyori. How's everyone this fine afternoon? Hello. Oh my gosh, it's been a whole, I think, was it 2 weeks? Wait, that's not 2 weeks. I think I did stream on YouTube last week. I'm pretty sure I did. But either way, hello again. Welcome back to another week of Shib does something dumb on Friday. Yes, so today, 'tis I, Shib, here to bless you with my presence. To read you the story. Okay, wait, we are not gonna finish this story today, of course. This thing has over this thing has over 60 chapters. I am not finishing this today, but I will definitely be reading at least a bit. Hi Tuya, hello, lovely afternoon. It's great seeing you. Thank you for following me all the way over from Twitch. Really appreciate it. Yes, mwah. Yeah. Okay, so, well, today's story is Pride and Prejudice, okay? I'm trying out a new type of stream, okay? So, for this work, Jane Austen has passed away for quite a while, and since then, the copyright of this project has already been released, so I am fully within my rights to use this material on stream, and well, I really respect her for being an amazing author and writer, okay? Yes, we studied this a bit in my literature class a while back. I am still one. I studied English literature, so she actually knows her books somewhat. Like, I know how to read these books, but just because I know how to read these books doesn't mean that, I am that well read. Oh wait, Ray is streaming. Give me a moment. I gotta open her stream so that I can really grind those sexy points. Yeah, perfect, done. Yeah, okay. Well, back to whatever else I was doing. Yes. So, essentially, what today's gonna be is that I'm going to read the story. I'm gonna read the story to you guys, and in between, I'm gonna interject whatever I'm thinking, okay? So think of it as something like my Ace Attorney streams, whereby I read stuff, and if something is really stupid, you just hear me burst out laughing and stuff, okay? So I wanna make it a bit more casual, a bit more comfortable, keep you guys comfortable, because I know not all of you have read Pride and Prejudice, or not all of you are book people, but don't worry, Sheep is a book people. Shib is book people enough for everyone here. So I really hope that I can get you all comfortable with touching some beautiful literature, okay? Because there is a reason Pride and Prejudice has been so popular and so timeless in the way that it has permeated, the typical media and stuff. You regularly see adaptations of it. You regularly see people bring it up. You regularly see it not happen as in people discussing it, writing essays on it, in the literature field, because it is truly very timeless, and the messaging inside honestly can apply to anyone. So, without further ado, I am going to begin, okay? So start chapter 1. The chapters are short. I think the first few chapters are short, but we'll wing it, okay? We'll wing it. As I always do. Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Okay, this is a very, very famous line, okay? Do keep that in mind. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of someone or other of their daughters. Basically. It's like, this guy may not even be interested in getting married, but the moment he enters the neighborhood, the other families are like, okay, he belongs to one of us now. We gotta fight for him. Okay, a fight to the death. Whose daughter can marry him? My dear Mr. Bennet, said his lady to him one day, have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last? Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. But it is, returned she, for Mrs. Long has just been here, and she told me all about it. Mr. Bennet made no answer. Do not you want to know who has taken it? Cried his wife impatiently. You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it. This was invitation enough. Basically, this is like a classic. This is a classic. Lovers conversation. Come on, classic couples conversation. It's like, don't you want to hear about it? And he's like, you want to tell me? Sure, I'll listen. And then there she goes. Today's elegant Shiba. I am always elegant. What are you talking about? I am always elegant, okay? And I will prove it today. Why, my dear, you must know, Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England. That he came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place, and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately that he is to take possession before Michaelmas, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of next week. Damn. Damn, that was a long sentence. Chaise and four. I'm not sure what chaise and four means, okay? We're gonna go through it together, okay? Chaise and four. What's it? Chaise and four? What is this? Oh, it's a type of closed carriage seating up to 3 people. Ah, oh my gosh. Okay, so typically, so you know those last time they have those like big horse carriages whereby is drawn by horses. So basically 4 refers to the number of horses pulling the carriage, but most chases only had like 2 horses because 4 horses are expensive. Yeah, it's kind of expensive, okay? It's like driving an entire limousine when you could just drive a large car. Yeah, like it just makes more economical sense, okay? What's Michaelmas, by the way? Michaelmas? What does Michaelmas mean? Oh, okay. Michaelmas is a Christian festival. It's a Christian festival observed in some Western liturgical calendars on 29th September. Oh, okay. So it is one of the more obscure festivals. I see. Okay, well, we learned something new today, fellas. We learned something new. Okay. What is his name? Bingley. Is he married or single? Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls! How so? How can it affect them? My dear Mr. Bennet, replied his wife, how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I am thinking of his marrying one of them. Typical Mrs. Bennet. Okay, Mrs. Bennet is always out to secure the best man for her daughters. And honestly, I can respect that hustle, okay? Back in these times, alright, girls didn't really have much they could aspire to do except marry well. So naturally, if they're in the gentry, if they are in the higher classes, then that's kind of like their only mission in life, like for real. There's nothing much else they can aspire to, yeah. Is that his design in settling here? Design? Nonsense, how can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes. I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps will still be better. For as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley might like you the best of the party. Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh my god, Okay, so basically, what they're talking about is he's talking, because she's like, there be my future son-in-law, okay, homie, there be my future son-in-law. You gotta go and like greet him, and her husband is like, nah, you guys can go for yourselves, but like, my beautiful wife, maybe you are just as beautiful as any of them. Maybe Mr. Bingley might like you the best. What a smooth talker Mr. Bennet is, Lamau. My dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty. In such cases, a woman has not often much beauty to think of. Oh, come on, you just complimented your wife. Don't take that back now. But my dear, you must indeed go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes into the neighborhood. It is more than I engage for, I assure you. But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go, merely on that account, for in general, they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not. You are over-scrupulous, Shirley. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls. Though I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie. Mr. Bennet's playing favorites, people. He's playing favorites. Yay! He's absolutely playing favorites. Oh my gosh. Yeah, basically, I mean, this is pretty obvious, but like, when you want to get to know someone, like your future son-in-law, hopefully future son-in-law, right? You gotta go and meet them. Gotta say like, hey, have you met my 4 beautiful daughters? My beautiful, sexy daughter. Okay, maybe not sexy. Okay, that was terrible for that time. They won't say sexy, but our beautiful daughters. You should consider, getting close to them. You get your pick of them, But you see, he has a clear. Okay, you know what? I should turn on cursor. Give me a moment. I should turn on cursor for this one. Should I turn on cursor for this one? Let's see. Turn on the cursor. Capture cursor. Okay. Yep. Can you see my cursor now? Yeah, you should be able to see my cursors, but like, hopefully you can see my cursors. Yay! Right? Is my cursor there? Yeah, you can see my cursor now. Yes. Okay. Let's continue. I desire you will do no such thing. Lizzie is not a bit better than the others, and I am sure she is not half so handsome as Jane, nor half so good-humored as Lydia. But you are always giving her the preference. Favoritism, fellas, not a good thing. Hi, Devoid. Hello. Hi. Good morning. Good morning to you too, Devoid. Yay. Good morning. Yay. I hope you've been having a wonderful morning, just as I've been having a wonderful afternoon. I'm sorry guys for being a bit late, but lunch ran a little late and like mom needed me to do a few things, so I ended up being a bit late. Excuse me. But today guys, we are doing something really special, which is a book reading. Okay, we will not finish the whole book today because that will be really ambitious. We do not do that around here, okay? I'll just continue doing it. Yeah, good morning, and I hope you've been having a wonderful morning, Devoid. Okay, hope you've been having a wonderful morning. Let me know if you've had good breakfast. Okay, let's continue. They have none of them much to recommend them. I'm gonna repeat. They have none of them much to recommend them, replied he. They're all silly and ignorant like other girls. But Lizzie has something more of a quickness than her sisters. He's saying Lizzie is smarter. Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion on my poor nerves. You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these 20 years at least. Help me. imagine talking about a nurse? It's like, look at what you've done to my nurse. And he's like, you've been talking about your nurse for the past 20 years. I know them very well, my lady. I spent most of my morning just sleeping. Ah, I see. Well, that's a wonderful morning. Okay, I didn't wake up until afternoon, so... Well, I also slept through my morning. Ah, you do not know what I suffer. But I hope you will get over it and live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood. It will be no use to us if 20 such should come, since you will not visit them. They are insulting each other at this point. It's like, may many eligible bachelors come, and it's like, even if 20 of them come, if you don't visit them, that's no use, okay? I also don't eat breakfast, lol. No! At least a hot drink? Not even coffee, Devoid? Come on, I'm sure you can do you can do better than that. Depend upon it, my dear, that when they're 20, I will visit them all. Mr. Bennet was so odd a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice, that the experience of 3 and 20 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was less difficult to develop. She was a woman of mean understanding, little information, and uncertain temper. When she was discontented, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its solace was visiting and news. Okay, so this is a beautiful passage to round off this chapter, because honestly, we didn't hear much besides the introduction of Mr. Bennet as well as Mrs. Bennet, his beautiful, beautiful wife. Okay, so odd, a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice. I don't think I need to really translate this part, but basically he is a mix of so many of these, like quick thinking, sarcastic humor, reserve, and honestly, I think of him as a very amazing man. I stand Mr. Bennet, okay? He knows what's good for his girls. And even though they've been married for 3 and 20 years, which is a fancy way of saying 23 years, his wife is still like, you know, being like, I don't understand you, why you like this, okay? Whereas hers is a lot less difficult to like understand. She's basically mean understanding, little information, and an uncertain temper. Well, I would say that she is a slightly more gossipy and ambitious wife. You know, usually when you have like a lot of daughters, I guess you have to be like that to like successfully run this kind of household, but she's also like easily discontented, as you can probably tell. Alright, gotta get to my classes. Nice talking to you again. Take care and have a great stream. Thank you, Divide. Have a great day at classes. Okay, be a good student. Okay, do all your work and you will find success. Yeah. Okay, so when we end off the chapter, basically, you realize that the start and the end of the chapter, okay, it's about finding a wife. That's basically the whole premise of this whole chapter, okay? So we learn about Mr. Bingley, rich man Mr. Bingley. It's like saying, oh, you know what? There's a millionaire that just moved in next door. How wonderful if we can get someone to like, you know, one of our daughters to marry him, huh? That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? But then, that may not be so. Okay, in that case, let's move on to chapter 2, where we continue, okay? Mr. Bennet was among... Okay, chapter 2. Sorry, I forgot. I should say chapter 2. Mr. Bennet was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley. He had always intended to visit him, though to the last always assuring his wife that he should not go. Until the evening after the visit was paid, she had no knowledge of it. It was then disclosed in the following manner. Observing his second daughter employed in trimming a hat, he suddenly addressed her with, I hope Mr. Bingley will like it, Lizzie. We are not in a way to know what Mr. Bingley likes, said her mother resentfully, since we are not to visit. She's still bitter, man. Look at this woman. She's still so bitter. She's so bitter. Yeah, basically, Mr. Bennett is a zun. Look at him. He's a tsundere. He's always intended to like visit him. He just wanted to zun his wife a little bit. Yeah. You know, when you're a man with like many grown daughters, I guess you don't have much to entertain yourself with except to like zun your wife, I suppose. But you forget, Mama, said Elizabeth, that we shall meet him at assemblies, and that Mrs. Long has promised to introduce him. I do not believe Mrs. Long would do any such thing. She has 2 nieces of her own. She is a selfish, hypocritical woman, and I have no opinion of her. Ah, typical married women gossip. No more have I, said Mr. Bennet, and I am glad to find that you do not depend on her serving you. Mrs. Bennet deigned not to make any reply, but, unable to contain herself, began scolding one of her daughters. Don't keep coughing so, Kitty, for heaven's sake. Have a little compassion on my nerves. You tear them to pieces. Just like, stop coughing. Can you imagine going to your daughters and being like, stop coughing, you're making me nervous. Like, bruh. My morning class on Fridays is just playing League. Well, it is what it is. It is Friday after all. The weekend's coming, everybody. So I hope you're all having a wonderful Friday. Look forward to the weekend. Yeah. Okay, let's continue. Kitty has no discretion in her coughs, said her father. She times them ill. I do not cough for my own amusement, replied Kitty fretfully. When is your next ball to be, Lizzie? Tomorrow fortnight. Aye, so it is, cried her mother, and Mrs. Long does not come back till the day before. So it will be impossible for her to introduce him, for she will not know him herself. Then, my dear, you may have the advantage of your friend and introduce Mr. Bingley to her. What an opportunistic man. Impossible, Mr. Bennet, impossible. When I am not acquainted with him myself, how can you be so teasing? I honor your circumspection. A fortnight's acquaintance is certainly very little. One cannot know what a man really is by the end of a fortnight. But if we do not venture, somebody else will. And after all, Mistress Long and her nieces must stand their chance, and therefore she will think it an act of kindness. If you decline the office, I will take it on myself. The girl stared at her father. Mrs. Bennet said only, Nonsense, nonsense! What can be the meaning of that emphatic exclamation? Cried he. Do you consider the forms of introduction and the stress that is laid on them as nonsense? I cannot quite agree with you there. What say you, Mary? For you are a young lady of deep reflection, I know, and read good books and make extracts. Oh my god, this is so... Okay, so we're introduced to Elizabeth, Kitty, as well as Mary. So that's 3 of them, okay? Mary wished to say something very sensible, but knew not how. While Mary is adjusting her ideas, he continued, Let us return to Mr. Bingley. I am sick of Mr. Bingley, cried his wife. I am sorry to hear that, but why did you not tell me so before? If I had known as much this morning, I certainly would not have called on him. It is very unlucky, but as I have actually paid the visit, we cannot escape the acquaintance now. Basically, he's like, oh, I guess it's a shame. Okay, it's basically the like, Pride and Prejudice speak of like, what a shame that I already visited him. You know, I guess we have no choice but to be acquaintances now. The astonishment of the ladies was just what he wished, that of Mrs. Bennet perhaps surpassing the rest. Though when the first tumult of joy was over, she began to declare that it was what she had expected all the while. She's like, I totally expected you to do that. Damn, I saw this coming a mile away. Whew. certainly wasn't, wasn't expecting you to not do that. How good it was in you, my dear Mr. Bennet. But I knew I should persuade you at last. I was sure you loved your girls too well to neglect such an acquaintance. Well, how pleased I am, and it is such a good joke too, that you should have gone this morning and never said a word about it until now. Now, Kitty, you may cough as much as you choose, said Mr. Bennet, and as he spoke, he left the room, fatigued with the raptures of his wife. His wife was being a bit too loud. What an excellent father you have, girls, said she. When the door was shut, I do not know how you will ever make him amends for his kindness, or me either, for that matter. At our time of life, it is not so pleasant, I can tell you, to be making new acquaintance every day. But for your sakes, we would do anything. Lydia, my love, though you are the youngest, I dare say Mr. Bingley would dance with you at the next ball. Oh, said Lydia stoutly, I am not afraid. For though I am the youngest, I'm the tallest. Ah, she's the tallest. Okay, so we learned about Lydia, right? So there is, Elizabeth is the second eldest. I forgot who's the eldest. Was it Mary? I think it was Mary, but I can't remember who is... Yeah, something like that. I can't remember the order. Help. I'm just as lost as all of you people. The rest of the evening was spent in conjecturing how soon he would return Mr. Bennet's visit and determining when they should ask him to dinner. Okay, so the rich man has been contacted, essentially. And we have been introduced to the 4 Bennet sisters. Okay, they only have 4 daughters. So, wait, 5? Was it 5 or 4? I think it was 4. I believe it was 4. Help. Wait, 5 daughters. Okay. I think I lost track. Who are the 5 daughters again? It's alright, guys. Eventually we'll find out, okay? We will discover the story together, even though I've read it before, but we don't talk about that. Chapter 3. Not all that Mr. Bennet, however, with the assistance of her 5 daughters, could ask on the subject was sufficient to draw from her husband any satisfactory description of Mr. Bingley. They attacked him in various ways, with barefaced questions, ingenious suppositions, and distant surmises, but he eluded the skill of them all. And they were at last obliged to accept the second-hand intelligence of their neighbor, Lady Lucas. I see. So basically, they did their best to get him to tell them like, hey, what about Mr. Bingley is good? You know, like, is he great? Is he good? Is he like is he handsome? What is he like? And somehow their husband, Mr. Bennet, managed to elude them all. I mean, if you're grown up with like 6 daughters, not 6 daughters, you 6 women in your life, you learn the art of xiaming, of like, hui, off you go. Doing the limbo. He does the limbo very well. Okay, so their neighbor is Lady Lucas. Okay, I'm not sure about Sir William. Probably this is her husband. Okay. Her report was highly favorable. Sir William had been delighted with him. He was quite young, wonderfully handsome, extremely agreeable, and to crown the whole, he meant to be at the next assembly with a large party. Nothing could be more delightful. To be fond of dancing was a certain step towards falling in love, and the very lively hopes of Mr. Bingley's heart were entertained. I see, ha ha ha. When you dance at the ball, guys, romantic dancing at the ball. Yay! If I can but see one of my daughters happily settled at Netherfield, said Mrs. Bennet to her husband, and all the others equally well married, I shall have nothing to wish for. In a few days, Mr. Bingley returned Mr. Bennet's visit and sat about 10 minutes with him in his library. Okay, so basically he's like, "Sup, thank you for visiting me. I am here to return the favor." He had entertained hopes of being admitted to a sight of the young ladies, of whose beauty he had heard much. But he saw only the father. The ladies were somewhat more fortunate, for they had the advantage of ascertaining from an upper window that he wore a blue coat and rode a black horse. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. An invitation to dinner was soon afterwards dispatched, and already had Mrs. Bennet planned the courses that were to do credit to her housekeeping. Okay, I think one thing that we tend to overlook a lot is that during these times, when you're a rich person, okay, I think even now it's applicable. Like when you're a rich person, like hosting people, hosting guests, and like ensuring that they got the best possible hospitality you could offer was a sign and responsibility of like the rich, okay? So they would always have to do their best to be like, yeah, I will serve only the best food. I will make sure the servants know what to do, treat this guest really well. Because honestly, if the hospitality is not good enough, it's a huge attack to their pride, okay? So this is why they have to be like, oh my god, no, we gotta impress him. I mean that, and she also wants him to marry one of her daughters. But besides that, it's generally the entire thing about the gentry. Yeah. Well, some nuggets of news for you guys. Mr. Bingley was obliged to be in town the following day and consequently unable to accept the honor of the invitation, etc. Mrs. Bennet was quite disconcerted. She could not imagine what business he could have in town so soon after his arrival in Hertfordshire. Hertfordshire, I think. And she began to fear that he might be always flying about from one place to another and never settled at Netherfield as he ought to be. Lady Lucas quieted her fears a little by starting the idea of his being gone to London only to get a large party for the ball. And a report soon followed. And a report soon followed that Mr. Bingley was to bring 12 ladies and 7 gentlemen with him to the assembly. The girls grieved over such a number of ladies, but were comforted the day before the ball by hearing that instead of 12, he had brought only 6 with him from London. His 5 sisters, and a cousin. Ooh, damn, Mr. Bingley has many sisters as well. So basically he brought his family. So they have no competition, guys. No competition, it's just his family. Whew, crisis averted. And when the party entered the assembly room, it consisted of only 5 altogether. Mr. Bingley, his 2 sisters, the husband of the eldest, and another young man. Mr. Bingley was good-looking and gentlemanlike. He had a pleasant countenance and easy, unaffected manners. Good man, good man. His sisters were fine women with an air of decided fashion. His brother-in-law, Mr. Hurst, merely looked the gentleman, but his friend, Mr. Darcy, soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report which was in general circulation within 5 minutes after his entrance of his having 10,000 a year. Holy shit, he is richer than Mr. Bingley. Good lord. I think, what was it? Like, I think they mentioned Bingley was like, wait, this is Mr. Darcy, right? Okay, so the thing is that Mr. Bingley was reported to have like about 4,000 a year. Like, that's his huge ass income during that time, and this guy more than doubles it. Oof. Oh gosh, Ben. He is so rich, basically, guys. Very nice, very nice. So they are both very handsome, very eligible, and very delicious to the ladies. So we're finally introduced to Mr. Darcy, and we are gonna find out what he's like. The gentleman pronounced him to be a fine figure of a man. The ladies declared he was much handsomer than Mr. Bingley, and he was looked at with great admiration for about half the evening, till his manners gave a disgust which turned the tide of his popularity. For he was discovered to be proud, to be above his company, and above being pleased. and not all his large estate in Derbyshire could then save him from having a most forbidding, disagreeable countenance and being unworthy to be compared with his friend. Ah, GG. Huh? Oh boy. This is terrible. Basically, people thought he was so handsome, he was so beautiful, and it's like, oh my god, he's richer as well, until his terrible manners, because he seems like a proud man. Oh no. Mr. Bingley had soon made himself acquainted with all the principal people in the room. He was lively and unreserved, danced every dance, was angry that the ball closed so early, and talked of giving one himself at Netherfield. Social butterfly, we want that in a man. Such amiable qualities must speak for themselves. What a contrast between him and his friend. Mr. Darcy danced only once with Mrs. Hurst and once with Miss Bingley, declined being introduced to any other lady, and spent the rest of the evening in walking about the room, speaking occasionally to one of his own party. His character was decided. He was the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world, and everybody hoped that he would never come there again. Amongst the most violent against him was Mrs. Bennet, whose dislike of his general behavior was sharpened into particular resentment by his having slighted one of her daughters. Oh my god. Oh my god. He offended one of the Bennet sisters. It's terrible, guys. Elizabeth Bennet had been obliged by the scarcity of gentlemen to sit down for 2 dances, and during part of that time Mr. Darcy had been standing near enough for her to overhear a conversation between him and Mr. Bingley, who came from the dance for a few minutes to press his friend to join it. "Come, Darcy," said he, "I must have you dance. I hate to see you standing about by yourself in this stupid manner. You had much better dance." "I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. At such an assembly as this, it will be insupportable. Your sisters are engaged, and there is not another woman in the room whom it would not be a punishment to me to stand up with." Oh, Jesus Christ. Oof. Oh. Oh my. Help. "I would not be so fastidious as you are," cried Bingley, "for a kingdom. Upon my honor, I have never met with so many pleasant girls in my life as I have this evening, and there are several of them, you see, uncommonly pretty." Essentially, he's like, I only dance with people I know with, and like, dancing with any of the other women here is gonna be, I'd rather die. That's what he's saying. "You are dancing with the only handsome girl in the room," said Mr. Darcy, looking at the eldest Miss Bennet. "Oh, she is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. But there is one of her sisters sitting down just behind you who is very pretty and I dare say very agreeable. Do let me ask my partner to introduce you." "Which do you mean?" And turning around, he looked for a moment at Elizabeth, till catching her eye, he withdrew his and coldly said, "She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me, and I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men. You had better return to your partner and enjoy her smiles, for you are wasting your time with me." Oh my god. Basically, it's like, Lamau, nah, she fine, she okay, but like not pretty enough. Oof. Mr. Bingley followed his advice. Mr. Darcy walked off, and Elizabeth remained with no very cordial feelings towards him. She does not like him, like who would, man? She told the story, however, with a great spirit among her friends, for she had a lively, playful disposition which delighted in anything ridiculous. The evening altogether passed off pleasantly to the whole family. Mrs. Bennet had seen her eldest daughter much admired by the Netherfield party. Mr. Bingley had danced with her twice, and she had been distinguished by his sisters. Jane was as much gratified by this as her mother could be, though in a quieter way. Elizabeth felt Jane's pleasure. Mary had heard herself mentioned to Miss Bingley as the most accomplished girl in the neighborhood, and Catherine and Lydia had been fortunate enough to be never without partners, which was all that they had yet learned to care for at the ball. Yay, they had a wonderful evening, guys. They returned, therefore, in good spirits to Longbourn, the village where they lived and of which they were the principal inhabitants. Okay. They found Mr. Bennet still up. With a book, he was regardless of time, and on the present occasion he had a great deal of curiosity as to the event of an evening which had raised such splendid expectations. He had rather hoped that all his wife's views on the stranger would be disappointed, but soon found that he had a very different story to hear. Oh, it's like welcome news, guys, welcome news, yay. Excuse me. Yeah, he had hoped his wife would be a disappointing guy, but well, thanks to this story, they were not disappointed. Oh, my dear Mr. Bennet, as she entered the room, we have had a most delightful evening, a most excellent ball. I wish you had been there. Jane was so admired, nothing could be like it. Everybody said how well she looked, and Mr. Bingley thought her quite beautiful and danced with her twice. Only think of that, my dear! He actually danced with her twice, and she was the only creature in the room that he asked a second time. First of all, he asked Miss Lucas. I was so vexed to see him stand up with her. But, however, he did not admire her at all. Indeed, nobody can. You know, and he seemed quite struck with Jane as she was going down the dance. So he inquired who she was and got introduced and asked her for the tune next. Then, the 2/3 he danced with Miss King, and the 2/4 with Maria Lucas, and the 2/5 with Jane again, and the 2/6 with Lizzie, and the Boulanger. If he had any compassion for me, cried her husband impatiently, he would not have danced half so much. For God's sake, say no more of his partners. Oh, that he had sprained his ankle in the first dance. And basically, for like the sake of Mr. Bennet's ears, he wished Mr. Bingley did not dance that much. It's like, I don't want to hear about it. God, good lord. Oh, my dear, continued Mrs. Bennet. Sorry, I can't read apparently. Oh, my dear, continued Mrs. Bennet, I'm quite delighted with him. He is so excessively handsome, and his sisters are charming women. I never in my life saw anything more elegant than their dresses. I dare say the lace upon Mrs. Hurst's gown. Here she was interrupted again. Mr. Bennet protested against any description of finery. She was therefore obliged to seek another branch of the subject, and related with much bitterness of spirit and some exaggeration the shocking rudeness of Mr. Darcy. But I can assure you, she added, that Lizzie does not lose much by not suiting his fancy, for he is a most disagreeable, horrid man, not at all worth pleasing, so high and so conceited that there was no enduring him. He walked here, and he walked there, fancying himself so great, not handsome enough to dance with. I wish you had been there, my dear, to have given him one of your set-downs. I quite detest the man. Essentially, guys, he is pretty darn hated at this point, dear Mr. Darcy. Okay, I won't say he's a poor guy because he asked for it, but damn, he sucks. When Jane and Elizabeth were alone, the former, who had been cautious in her praise of Mr. Bingley before, expressed to her sister how very much she admired him. Alright, this is chapter 4. Chapter 4, people, yay! He is just what a young man ought to be, said she. Sensible, good-humoured, lively, and I never saw such happy manners, so much ease, and with such perfect good breeding. Oh, yes. He is also handsome, replied Elizabeth, which a young man ought likewise to be, if he possibly can. His character is thereby complete. I was very much flattered by his asking me to dance a second time. I did not expect such a compliment. Did not you? I did for you. But that is one great difference between us. Compliments always take you by surprise, and me never. What could be more natural than his asking you again? I could not help seeing that you were but 5 times as pretty as every other woman in the room. No thanks to his gallantry for that. Well, he certainly is very agreeable, and I give you leave to like him. You have liked many a stupider person. She's like, oh god, finally, my tete has fallen in love with like a good man. I give my approval, unlike all the other guys she liked before. Good morning, Shib. Good morning, Saya. Good morning. Good morning to you. And from my side, good afternoon. I hope you've been having a wonderful afternoon. Hi, Silver. Hello. Hello. Lovely for you to join. Thank you for joining. Thank you. I am reading. I am now reading Shib. So I will just be reading today. I'm reading Pride and Prejudice. I hope you guys enjoy some good literature, people. Dear Lizzie, oh, you are a great deal too apt, to like people in general. Sorry. I think I need to calm down a little. Okay. Oh, you're a great deal too apt, to like people in general. You never see a fault in anybody. All the world are good and agreeable in your eyes. I never heard you speak ill of a human being in my life. I would wish not to be hasty in censuring anyone, but I always speak what I think. I know you do, and it is that which makes the wonder. With your good sense, to be so honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others. Affectation of candor is common enough. One meets with it everywhere. But to be candid without ostentation or design, to take the good of everybody's character and make it still better, and say nothing of the bad, belongs to you alone. And so you like this man's sisters too, do you? Their manners are not equal to his. Certainly not, at first, but they are very pleasing women when you converse with them. Miss Bingley is to live with her brother and keep his house, and I am much mistaken if we shall not find a very charming neighbor in her. Oh. Elizabeth listened in silence, but was not convinced. Their behavior at the assembly had not been calculated to please in general, and with more quickness of observation and less pliancy of temper than her sister, and with a judgment too unassailed by any attention to herself, she was very little disposed to approve them. They were in fact very fine ladies, not deficient in good humor when they were pleased, nor in the power of being agreeable where they chose it, but proud and conceited. They were rather handsome, had been educated in one of the first private seminaries in town, and had a fortune of £20,000, were in the habit of spending more than they ought, and of associating with people of rank, and were therefore in every respect entitled to think well of themselves and meanly of others. Ooh, shoo. I see. So, let me try and translate this part. Essentially, she is a little sharper than her sister, and is a bit more like irrational thinking. Like, it wasn't, they weren't very socially pleasing, okay? They came, and then they were just, they were pretty people, and they are very educated people, but perhaps what Elizabeth is saying is that they're not really behaving like part of the gentry, okay? They're not really behaving specifically part of the gentry, okay? They were of a respectable family in the north of England, a circumstance more deeply impressed on their memories than that their brother's fortune and their own had been acquired by trade. Okay, one thing you guys may not know is that when you come from part of the gentry, like from the upper class, like a key to being upper class is the fact that you technically do not have to work. Like, you are so rich that essentially you spend your days doing all these things except work, okay? And that is like the pride of the upper class, right? That's why you see a lot of fiction like insulting the upper class and all that kind of thing, okay? So when they earn money through working, which when you say acquired by trade, right? When you say earn money through working, a lot of the upper class do not consider that as like how do you say, upper class money? Because to them, working is a very working class thing. So, think of it as old money and new money, right? You see the way that old money people were raised, their manners and stuff. They have a certain elegance and certain like way they carry themselves, right? But new money, people who let's say got lucky with a business and now they are millionaires, billionaires maybe. They will not have the same level of manners and the same way of carrying themselves. So in a way, right, I would say that Elizabeth is kind of judging them for being working class. Because they're technically kind of working class. They're rich, okay? They're rich. But that money still came from working. From likely themselves working. Okay, so this is an important distinction to make. Yeah. Elizabeth is not some pure person herself, okay? This thing we have to keep in mind. Let's continue. Mr. Bingley inherited property to the amount of nearly £100,000 from his father, who had intended to purchase an estate but did not live to do it. Oh gosh, £100,000! I don't even have this much in present day. Holy shit. Mr. Bingley intended it likewise and sometimes made choice of his county, But as he was now provided with a good house and the liberty of a manor, it was doubtful to many of those who best knew the easiness of his temper whether he might not spend the remainder of his days at Netherfield and leave the next generation to purchase. So essentially, he has a shit ton of money, people. Money. His sisters were very anxious for his having an estate of his own. But though he was now established only as a tenant, Miss Bingley was by no means unwilling to preside at his table, nor was Mrs. Hurst, who had married a man of more fashion than fortune, less disposed to consider his house as her home when it suited her. Okay, well, I suppose they were concerned that he did not have his own house because essentially he is renting, guys. You have to remember, he is renting his house. He's a tenant. For someone so rich, you expect him to like buy his own place, but he's only renting. Interesting, isn't it, guys? Interesting that a rich man should rent. This begins on my own. First to know was Mrs. Hurst would marry a man of fortune. I see. So Mrs. Hurst would marry a man of more fashion than fortune. This is like Pride and Prejudice speak for saying someone she did not marry someone for the money. And essentially does not really consider their marital home to be like her home. Ah well. Mr. Bingley had not been of age 2 years when he was tempted by an accidental recommendation to look at Netherfield House. Had not been of age 2 years. Okay, this does not mean he was 2 years old when he see, but when someone comes of age in society, that means I think they would be about, was it 18 or 20 for the gentry? They kind of like debut in society. Like, I am an adult now, okay? So what they mean is that he hadn't even been 2 years into reaching that specific age when he was like, oh whoa, what this? He did look at it and into it for half an hour, was pleased with the situation and the principal rooms, satisfied with what the owner said in its praise, and took it immediately. He's like, I like it. I'll take your entire stock. Between him and Darcy, there was a very steady friendship. In spite of great opposition of character, Bingley was endeared to Darcy by the easiness, openness, and ductility. What is ductility? Give me a moment. What is ductility? ability of a material to sustain a large permanent deformation under a tensile load up to point of fracture. I understood none of that sentence. Ductility used in everyday life, yes. No, ductility used in sentences. Used in a sentence. Oh god. Oh god, this is too sciencey, but it kind of is toughness, okay? Like basically, I think what it's trying to say is ductility. That means the toughness of his temper, I suppose. The stubbornness of his temper. I suppose that's what he's getting at. Though no disposition could offer a greater contrast to his own, and though with his own he never appeared dissatisfied. On the strength of Darcy's regard, Bingley had the firmest reliance, and of his judgment the highest opinion. In understanding, Darcy was the superior. Bingley was by no means deficient, but Darcy was clever. He was at the same time haughty, reserved, and fastidious. And his manners, though well-bred, were not inviting. In that respect, his friend had greatly the advantage. Bingley was sure of being liked wherever he appeared. Darcy was continually giving offense. So these two cannot be more different, okay? They cannot be more different. Like, Darcy clearly has like upper class manners, like he has the gentry manners, but he is a cold man. He is a zun man, guys. He is so zun, okay? Absolutely zun. Let's continue. The manner in which they spoke of the Meryton Assembly was sufficiently characteristic. Bingley had never met with pleasanter people or prettier girls in his life. Everybody had been most kind and attentive to him. There had been no formality, no stiffness. He had soon felt acquainted with all the room. And as to Miss Bennet, he could not conceive an angel more beautiful. Ah, he's in love, guys. He's in love. Darcy, on the contrary, had seen a collection of people in whom there was little beauty and no fashion, for none of whom he had felt the smallest interest, and from none received either attention or pleasure. Miss Bennet he acknowledged to be pretty, but she smiled too much. Hey, shut up. Just because she smiles too much and she's not your type does not mean you can, like, insult her like this. God damn it. Mrs. Hurst and her sister allowed it to be so. But still, they admired her and liked her, and pronounced her to be a sweet girl, and one whom they should not object to know more of. Miss Bennet was therefore established as a sweet girl, and their brother felt authorized by such commendation to think of her as he chose. As he chose. Yay, guys. Basically, he has the approval. He has the approval of the sister. Yay. Yay, 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 yay. Very good, right? So, essentially, one of the couples is going to be them. Like, it's already set up that way. Okay, now. Chapter 5. Wow, we have already read 5 chapters. How are you guys feeling about it? Hope you guys are having fun. Chapter 5. Within a short walk of Longbourn lived a family with whom the Bennets were particularly intimate. Sir William Lucas had been formerly in trade in Meryton, where he had made a tolerable fortune, and risen to the honor of knighthood by an address to the king during his mayoralty? Yeah, I think it's him being a mayor, yeah. The distinction had perhaps been felt too strongly. It had given him a disgust to his business and to his residence in the small market town, and quitting them both, he had removed with his family to a house about a mile from Meryton, denominated from that period Lucas Lodge, where he could think with pleasure of his own importance, and unshackled by business, occupy himself solely in being civil to all the world. Basically, he thought very highly of himself after being knighted. Whew. For, though elated by his rank, it did not render him supercilious. On the contrary, he was all attention to everybody. By nature inoffensive, friendly, and obliging, his presentation at St. James had made him courteous. Lady Lucas was a very good kind of woman, not too clever to be a valuable neighbor to Mrs. Bennet. So Mrs. Bennet can't stand it if her neighbor is a bit too smart, okay? Write notes on this. They had several children. The eldest of them, a sensible, intelligent young woman, about 27, was Elizabeth's intimate friend. That the Miss Lucases and the Miss Bennet should meet to talk over a ball was absolutely necessary. And the morning after the assembly brought the former to Longbourn to hear and to communicate. Nice. You began the evening well, Charlotte, said Mrs. Bennet with civil self-command. To Miss Lucas, you were Mr. Bingley's first choice. Oh my. Nice, you know, they gotta assess the competition, people. Yes, but he seemed to like his second better. Oh, you mean Jane? I suppose because he danced with her twice. To be sure, that did seem as if he admired her. Indeed, I rather believe he did. I heard something about it, but I hardly know what. Something about Mr. Robinson. Ooh. Perhaps you mean what I overheard between him and Mr. Robinson. Did not I mention it to you? Mr. Robinson's asking him how he liked our Meryton assemblies, and whether he did not think there were a great many pretty women in the room, and which he thought the prettiest. And his answering immediately to the last question, oh, the eldest Miss Bennet, beyond a doubt, there cannot be two opinions on that point. Ah, he basically thought she was the prettiest. That's like a huge praise. Upon my word. Well, that was very decided indeed. That does seem as if, but however, it may all come to nothing, you know? My overhearings were more to the purpose than yours, Eliza, said Charlotte. Mr. Darcy is not so well worth listening to as his friend, is he? Poor Eliza, to be only just tolerable. Oosh. Insulting. I beg you would not put it into Lizzie's head to be vexed by his ill treatment, for he is such a disagreeable man that it would be quite misfortune to be liked by him. Oh boy. Mrs. Long told me last night that he sat close to her for half an hour without once opening his lips. I don't know how people sit next to complete strangers for half an hour without talking to them, but I understand that completely, absolutely. Are you quite sure, ma'am? Is not there a little mistake? Said Jane. I certainly saw Mr. Darcy speaking to her. Because she asked him at last how he liked Netherfield, and he could not help answering her. But she said he seemed very angry at being spoke to. Oh my gosh. Rude, man, rude. Miss Bingley told me, said Jane, that he never speaks much unless among his intimate acquaintance. With them, he is remarkably agreeable. I do not believe a word of it, my dear. If he had been so very agreeable, he would have talked to Mrs. Long. But I can guess how it was. Everybody says that he is eat up with pride, and I dare say he had heard somehow that Mrs. Long does not keep a carriage, and had come to the ball in a hack chaise. Oh, can't she stop shit-talking her neighbors? I do not mind his not talking to Mrs. Long, said Miss Lucas, but I wish he had danced with Eliza. Another time, Lizzie, said her mother, I would not dance with him if I were you. I believe, ma'am, I may safely promise you never to dance with him. Lemao. They're basically shit-talking him now. Good. His pride, said Mrs. Lucas, Miss Lucas, sorry, does not offend me so much as pride often does, because there is an excuse for it. One cannot wonder that so very fine a young man, with family, fortune, everything in his favor, should think highly of himself. If I may so express it, he has a right to be proud. There is a point there? There is, indeed. That is very true, replied Elizabeth, and I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. Ouch. It's like, I'm fine with his pride if he did not insult mine, okay? Valid, Elizabeth. the true queen. Pride, observed Mary, who had piqued herself upon the solidity of her reflections, is a very common failing, I believe. By all that I have ever read, I am convinced that it is very common indeed, that human nature is particularly prone to it, and that there are very few of us who do not cherish a feeling of self-complacency on the score of some quality or other, real or imaginary. Vanity and pride are different things, though the words are often used synonymously. A person may be proud without being vain. Pride relates more to our opinions of ourselves, vanity to what we would have others think of us. Nice. If I were as rich as Mr. Darcy, cried a young Lucas who came with his sisters, I should not care how proud I was. I would keep a pack of foxhounds and drink a bottle of wine every day. Please do not sink into alcoholism, young Lucas. Then you would drink a great deal more than you ought, said Mrs. Bennet. And if I were to see you do it, I should take away your bottle directly. The boy protested that she should not. She continued to declare that she would, and the argument ended only with the visit. Okay, so they're assessing his behavior and what they think of him at this point. They're assessing like, okay, yeah, he is rich, so maybe he has a right to be proud. And Elizabeth is like, no, he insulted me. I'm not gonna forgive him for it. Like why would I? Okay. And then you have people being like, oh man, if I was as rich as him, holy. Yeah, I too would like drink alcohol, but I won't drink it every day. I'll just drink better alcohol. You know what I mean, guys? Okay, now we shall continue on to chapter 6. Okay, let's see whether we can finish maybe up to about 8-ish, 8-ish, maybe 8-ish, 10-ish by today. We'll see how. Okay, we'll see how. Chapter 6. The ladies of Longbourn soon waited on those of Netherfield. The visit was returned in due form. Miss Bennet's pleasing manners grew on the goodwill of Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley, and though the mother was found to be intolerable, and the younger sisters not worth speaking to, a wish of being better acquainted with them was expressed towards the two eldest. By Jane, this attention was received with the greatest pleasure, but Elizabeth still saw superciliousness in their treatment of everybody, hardly accepting even her sister, and could not like them, though their kindness to Jane, such as it was, had a value as arising in all probability from the influence of their brother's admiration. Oh, that was... bruh, this... Good lord, these are 2 sentences. Okay, not 2 sentences. I think I just lumped them all together. Good lord. Well, they don't like Mrs. Bennet. Okay, the younger sisters are too immature, but they quite like Jane as well as Elizabeth. Okay, Jane is the eldest, Elizabeth is the second eldest. Okay, and although she was still cynical because, you know, she sees how they treat other people, like, she's like, okay, fine. It's like, you're nice to my elder sister, I'll accept it, okay? It was generally evident whenever they met that he did admire her, and to her it was equally evident that Jane was yielding to the preference which she had begun to entertain for him from the first, and was in a way to be very much in love. But she considered with great pleasure that it was not likely to be discovered by the world in general, since Jane united with great strength of feeling, a composure of temper, and a uniform cheerfulness of manner which would guard her from the suspicions of impertinence. She mentioned this to her friend Miss Lucas. Let me see. Therefore, it was very considered not likely discovered. I see. Okay, so basically what this is saying is that she was very much in love, but because she is very good at controlling her emotions with a good composure, and she's generally has a cheerful manner, right? So she didn't want to behave impertinently and like she's keeping it cool, you know? Basically, keep it cool, keep it cool. I love him a lot, but like, keep it cool, man. She's the queen of keeping it cool. That's what it's saying. It may perhaps be pleasant, replied Charlotte, to be able to impose on the public in such a case, but it is sometimes a disadvantage to be so very guarded. If a woman conceals her affection with the same skill from the object of it, she may lose the opportunity of fixing him, and it will then be but poor consolation to believe the world equally in the dark. There is so much of gratitude or vanity in almost every attachment that it is not safe to leave any to itself. We can all begin freely. A slight preference is natural enough, but there are very few of us who have heart enough to be really in love without encouragement. In 9 cases out of 10, a woman had better show more affection than she feels. Bingley likes your sister undoubtedly, but he may never do more than like her if she does not help him on. That is true. That is true. Basically, what Charlotte is saying is like, you know, just like, come on, show that you actually like him back. Come on, you gotta help him out here, man. You gotta help out the brother. But she does help him on as much as her nature will allow. If I can perceive her regard for him, he must be a simpleton indeed not to discover it too. Remember, Eliza, that he does not know Jane's disposition as you do. But if a woman is partial to a man and does not endeavor to conceal it, he must find it out. Perhaps he must if he sees enough of her. But though Bingley and Jane meet tolerably often, tolerably, what an interesting word, it is never for many hours together. And as they always see each other in large mixed parties, it is impossible that every moment should be employed in conversing together. Jane should therefore make the most of every half hour in which she can command his attention. When she is secure of him, there will be leisure for falling in love as much as she chooses. Your plan is a good one, replied Elizabeth, where nothing is in question but the desire of being well married. And if I were determined to get a rich husband, or any husband, I dare say I should adopt it. But these are not Jane's feelings. She is not acting by design. And yet she cannot even be certain of the degree of her own regard, nor of its reasonableness. She has known him only a fortnight. She danced 4 dances with him at Meryton. She saw him one morning at his own house, and has since dined in company with him 4 times. This is not quite enough to make her understand his character. Not as you represented. Had she merely dined with him, she might only have discovered whether he had a good appetite. But you must remember that 4 evenings have been spent together, and 4 evenings may do a great deal. So basically it's like, dude, she did not just eat with him, you know, she actually spent like evenings with him. Like, damn, that's a lot of time. Yes, these 4 evenings have enabled them to ascertain that they both like Vington better than commerce. But with respect to any other leading characteristic, I do not imagine that much has been unfolded. Well, said Charlotte, I wish Jane success with all my heart, and if she were married to him tomorrow, I should think she had as good a chance of happiness as if she were to be studying his character for a 12 month. Happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. If the disposition of the parties are ever so well known to each other, or ever so similar beforehand, it does not advance their felicity in the least. They always continue to grow sufficiently, unlike afterwards, to have their share of vexation, and it is better to know as little as possible of the defects of the person with whom you are to pass your life. That is true. Basically, it's like, it's a gamble, right? Marriage is a gamble, okay? They're ever so well known to each other, so similar. I mean, like the dispositions, eventually they'll get to know each other well. I think is what she's saying. And like, best if they know as little of the flaws of a person with whom you are going to marry, but I don't agree with that, just saying. You make me laugh, Charlotte, but it is not sound. You know it is not sound and that you would never act in this way yourself. Oof. Occupied in observing Mr. Bingley's attentions to her sister, Elizabeth was far from suspecting that she was herself becoming an object of some interest in the eyes of his friend. Ooh. She was... So Mr. Darcy had... Mr. Darcy had at first scarcely allowed her to be pretty. He had looked at her without admiration at ball, and when they next met, he looked at her only to criticize. Rude! But no sooner had he made it clear to himself and his friends that she had hardly a good feature in her face, than he began to find it was rendered uncommonly intelligent by the beautiful expression of her dark eyes. To this discovery succeeded some others equally mortifying. Though he had detected with a critical eye more than one failure of perfect symmetry in her form. Hey, shut up! You're not perfect either. He was forced to acknowledge her figure to be light and pleasing, and in spite of his asserting that her manners were not those of the fashionable world, he was caught by their easy playfulness. Of this she was perfectly unaware. To her, he was only the man who had made himself agreeable nowhere, and who had not thought her handsome enough to dance with. Ooh. He's like, it's not like I like you or anything, baka. He began to wish to know more of her, and as a step towards conversing with her himself, attended to her conversation with others. His doing so drew her notice. It was at Sir William Lucas's, where a large party were assembled. It's like, I would like to know more about this pretty lady. I didn't say she was pretty at first, but like, but it's not like I can change my mind or anything. What does Mr. Darcy mean, said she to Charlotte, by listening to my conversation with Colonel Forster? That is a question which Mr. Darcy only can answer. But if he does it anymore, I shall certainly let him know that I see what he is about. He has a very satirical eye, and if I do not begin by being impertinent myself, I shall soon grow afraid of him. On his approaching them soon afterwards, though without seeming to have any intention of speaking, Miss Lucas defied her friend to mention such a subject to him, which immediately provoking Elizabeth to do it, she turned to him and said, Did not you think, Mr. Darcy, that I expressed myself uncommonly well just now, when I was teasing Colonel Foster to give us a ball at Meryton? With great energy, but it is a subject which always makes a lady energetic. Shh. You are severeness. It will be her soon turn to be teased, said Miss Lucas. I am going to open the instrument, Eliza, and you know what follows. You are a very strange creature by way of a friend, always wanting me to play and sing before anybody and everybody. If my vanity had taken a musical turn, you would have been invaluable. But as it is, I would rather not sit down before those who must be in the habit of hearing the very best performers. She's basically saying like, you know, like, I would rather not play in front of people who are used to listening to the best, right? On Miss Lucas's persevering, however, she added, Very well, if it must be so, it must. And gravely glancing at Mr. Darcy, there is a fine old saying, which everybody here is of course familiar with, keep your breath to cool your porridge, and I shall keep mine to swell my song. Gosh, I love the literary genius of this. Beautiful. Her performance was pleasing, though by no means capital. By the way, by instrument, they mean the piano. Like to me it was obvious, but to you guys it may not be. She was playing the piano. After a song or two, and before she could reply to the entreaties of several that she would sing again... Oh wait, she was singing! Oh, sorry. I forgot. Because I don't remember. I remember there was a piano, but like... Piano? Singing? It's one of those talents that upper class ladies always have. She was eagerly succeeded at the instrument by her sister Mary, who having, in consequence of being the only plain one in the family, worked hard for knowledge and accomplishments, was always impatient for display. Aww, poor girl. Mary had neither genius nor taste, and though vanity had given her application, it had given her likewise a pedantic air and conceited manner, which would have endured a higher degree of excellence than she had reached. Basically, she's like, she's a bit more proud, you know? Elizabeth, easy and unaffected, had been listened to with much more pleasure, though not playing half so well. But I guess the thing is, I think she was playing, but like I'm so confused. Why would she say sing if she play? Maybe it's just a literary thing. And Mary, at the end of a long concerto, was glad to purchase praise and gratitude by Scotch and Irish airs at the request of her 2 younger sisters, who, with some of the Lucases and 2 or 3 officers, joined eagerly in dancing at one end of the room. Very nice, very nice. Mr. Darcy stood near them in silent indignation at such a mode of passing the evening, to the exclusion of all conversation, and was too much engrossed by his own thoughts to perceive that Sir William Lucas was his neighbour, till Sir William thus began. What a charming amusement for young people this is, Mr. Darcy. There's nothing like dancing after all. I consider it as one of the fine refinements of polished societies. Dancing, again, they're always dancing. Certainly, sir, and it has the advantage of also being in vogue among the less polished societies of the world. Every savage can dance. Aish. Sir William only smiled. Your friend performs delightfully, he continued after a pause, on seeing Bingley join the group. And I doubt not that you are an adept in the science yourself, Mr. Darcy. You saw me dance at Meryton, I believe, sir. Yes, indeed, and received no inconsiderable pleasure from the sight. Do you often dance at St. James? Never, sir. Do you not think it would be a proper compliment to the place? It is a compliment which I never pay to any place if I can avoid it. You have a house in town, I conclude. Mr. Darcy bowed. I had once some thoughts of fixing in town myself, for I am fond of superior society, but I did not feel quite certain that the air of London would agree with Lady Lucas. He paused in hopes of an answer, but his companion was not disposed to make any. And Elizabeth, at that instant moving towards them, he was struck with the notion of doing a very gallant thing and called out to her. My dear Miss Eliza, why are you not dancing? Mr. Darcy, you must allow me to present this young lady to you as a very desirable partner. You cannot refuse to dance, I am sure, when so much beauty is before you. And taking her hand, he would have given it to Mr. Darcy, who, though extremely surprised, was not unwilling to receive it, when she instantly drew back and said with some discomposure to Sir William, Indeed, sir, I have not the least intention of dancing. I entreat you not to suppose that I moved this way in order to beg for a partner. She's like, it's not like I want to dance, okay? Don't pity me. Mr. Darcy, with great propriety, requested to be allowed the honor of her hand, but in vain. Elizabeth was determined, nor did Sir William at all shake a purpose by his attempt at persuasion. You excel so much in the dance, Miss Eliza, that it is cruel to deny me the happiness of seeing you. And though this gentleman dislikes amusement in general, he can have no objection, I am sure, to oblige us for 1/2 hour. Mr. Darcy is all politeness, said Elizabeth, smiling. He is, indeed, but considering the inducement, my dear Miss Eliza, we cannot wonder at his complaisance. For who would object to such a partner? Whoa. Elizabeth looked archly and turned away. Her resistance had not injured her with the gentleman, and he was thinking of her with some complacency when thus accosted by Miss Bingley. I can guess the subject of your reverie. I should imagine not. Oof. You are considering how insupportable it would be to pass many evenings in this manner, in such society, and indeed I am quite of your opinion. I was never more annoyed. The insipidity, and yet the noise, the nothingness, and yet the self-importance of all these people. What would I give to hear your strictures on them? Your conjecture is totally wrong. I assure you, my mind was more agreeably engaged. I have been meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow. Ooh, he's like, I am looking at someone. Miss Bingley immediately fixed her eyes on his face and desired he would tell her what lady had the credit of inspiring such reflections. Mr. Darcy replied with great intrepidity. Can they stop with these words? Intrepidity. Miss Elizabeth Bennet. Miss Elizabeth Bennet, repeated Miss Bingley. I am all astonishment. How long has she been such a favourite? And pray when am I to wish you joy? That is exactly the question which I expected you to ask. Essentially, just like, so when are you getting married? Like, who cares about the lady? Like, if you want her, she is yours, you know? Kind of like... That is exactly the question which I expected you to ask. A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony, and in a moment I knew you would be wishing me joy. Nay, if you are so serious about it, I shall consider the matter as absolutely settled. You will have a charming mother-in-law, indeed, and of course she will always be at Pemberley with you. Oh God. Nice. He listened to her with perfect indifference, while she chose to entertain herself in this manner, and as his composure convinced her that all was safe, her wit flowed along. Exposed, he's like, this woman, this specific one. But yeah, she's just a good woman, you know? And now, we are going... Yeah. We are going to be, chapter 7. We're going to chapter 7, okay guys? And we are going to talk about the situation of the Bennet family, okay? Because what's a Jane Austen novel without some kind of situation for the noble families, right? Mr. Bennet's property consisted... Chapter 7. Mr. Bennet's property consisted almost entirely in an estate of 2,000 a year, which unfortunately for his daughters was entailed in default of heirs male, on a distant relation. And their mother's fortune, though ample for her situation in life... my eyes, sorry, let me rub it for a bit. My eyes are like itchy. Itchy eyes. Itchy sheep eyes. Okay. And their mother's fortune, though ample for a situation in life, could but ill supply the deficiency of his. Her father had been an attorney in Meryton, and it left her £4,000. She had a sister married to a Mr. Phillips, who had been a clerk to their father, and succeeded him in the business, and a brother settled in London in a respectable line of trade. Excuse me. The village of Longbourn was only 1 mile from Meryton, a most convenient distance for the young ladies who were usually tempted thither 3 or 4 times a week to pay their duty to their aunt and to a milliner's shop just over the way. A milliner is a hat maker, okay? Just saying, milliners is a hat maker. And you know, back in those days, hats were like really popular. The 2 youngest of the family, Catherine and Lydia, were particularly frequent in these attentions. Their minds were more vacant than their sisters', and when nothing better offered, a walk to Meryton was necessary to amuse their morning hours and furnish conversation for the evening. And however bare of news the country in general might be, the country's very boring, they always contrived to learn some from their aunt. At present, indeed, they were well supplied both with news and happiness by the recent arrival of a militia regiment in the neighborhood. It was to remain the whole winter, and Meryton was the headquarters. Their visits to Mrs. Phillips were now productive of the most interesting intelligence. Every day added something to their knowledge of the officers' names and connections. Their lodgings were not long a secret, and at length they began to know the officers themselves. They know about all the officers, they know about all of these soldiers. Mr. Phillips visited them all, and this opened to his nieces a source of felicity unknown before. They could talk of nothing but officers, and Mr. Bingley's large fortune, the mention of which gave animation to their mother, was worthless in their eyes when opposed to the regimentals of an ensign. After listening one morning to the effusions on this subject, Mr. Bennet coolly observed, "From all that I can collect by your manner of talking, you must be two of the silliest girls in the country. I have suspected it some time, but I am now convinced." Aww. Catherine was disconcerted and made no answer. But Lydia, with perfect indifference, continued to express her admiration of Captain Carter, and her hope of seeing him in the course of the day as he was going the next morning to London. Basically it's like, what? Seriously? Falling in love with officers? Like, for real? "I am astonished, my dear," said Mrs. Bennet, "that you should be so ready to think your own children silly. If I wished to think slightingly of anybody's children, it should not be of my own, however. If my children are silly, I must hope to be always sensible of it. Yes, but as it happens, they are all of them very clever." This is like such a thinly veiled way of saying they must have gotten it from you. "This is the only point, I flatter myself, on which we do not agree. I had hoped our sentiments coincided in every particular, but I must so far differ from you as to think our two youngest daughters uncommonly foolish." "My dear Mr. Bennet, you must not expect such girls to have the sense of their father and mother. When they get to our age, I dare say they will not think about officers any more than we do. I remember the time when I liked a red coat myself very well, and indeed, so I do still at my heart, and if a smart young colonel with 5,000 or 6,000 a year should want one of my girls, I shall not say nay to him, and I thought Colonel Foster looked very becoming the other night as Sir William's in his regimentals." She's like, "I don't mind, they're rich." "Mamma," cried Lydia, "my aunt says that Colonel Forster and Captain Carter do not go so often to Miss Watson's as they did when they first came. She sees them now very often standing in Clark's library." Mrs. Bennet was prevented replying by the entrance of the footman with a note from Miss Bennet. It came from Netherfield, and the servant waited for an answer. Mrs. Bennet's eyes sparkled with pleasure, and she was eagerly calling out while her daughter read. "Well, Jane, who is it from? What is it about? What does he say? Well, Jane, make haste and tell us. Make haste, my love." "It is from Miss Bingley," said Jane, and then read it aloud. "My dear friend, if you are not so compassionate as to dine today with Louisa and me, we shall be in danger of hating each other for the rest of our lives, for a whole day's tete-a-tete between two women can never end without a quarrel. Come as soon as you can on the receipt of this. My brother and the gentleman are to dine with the officers. Yours ever, Caroline Bingley." She got invited by her future sister-in-law. "With the officers!" cried Lydia. "I wonder my aunt did not tell us of that." "Dining out," said Mrs. Bennet. "That is very unlucky." "Can I have the carriage?" said Jane. "No, my dear, you had better go on horseback because it seems likely to rain, and then you must stay all night." She's scheming, guys. She's scheming. She's like, "Can I have the car?" No. You like take the train there, so they have to stay all night. That's the equivalent of this. "That would be a good scheme," said Elizabeth, "if you were sure that they would not offer to send her home." "Oh, but the gentleman will have Mr. Bingley's chaise to go to Meryton, and the Hursts have no horses to theirs." "I had much rather go in the coach." "But my dear, your father cannot spare the horses, I am sure. They are wanted in the farm, Mr. Bennet, are not they?" Finding excuses. "They are wanted in the farm much oftener than I can get them. But if you have got them today, my mother's purpose will be answered." She did at last extort from her father an acknowledgement that the horses were engaged. Jane was therefore obliged to go on horseback, and the mother attended her to the door with many cheerful prognostics of a bad day. She's like, "It's gonna rain, you can't come home tonight, yeah, yeah." Can you imagine your mom being like, "Yeah, you can't come home tonight, all the best, honey." Her hopes were answered. Jane had not been gone long before it rained hard. Her sisters were uneasy for her, but her mother was delighted. The rain continued the whole evening without intermission. Jane certainly could not come back. "This was a lucky idea of mine, indeed," said Mrs. Bennet, more than once, as if the credit of making it rain were all her own. Till the next morning, however, she was not aware of all the felicity of her contrivance. Breakfast was scarcely over when a servant from Netherfield brought the following note for Elizabeth. "My dearest Lizzie, I find myself very unwell this morning, which I suppose is to be imputed to my getting wet through yesterday. My kind friends will not hear of my returning home till I am better. They insist also on my seeing Mr. Jones, therefore do not be alarmed if you should hear of his having been to me, and excepting a sore throat and headache, there is not much the matter with me. Yours." Oh no! GG. GG. "Well, my dear," said Mr. Bennet when Elizabeth had read the note aloud, "if your daughter should have a dangerous fit of illness, if she should die, it would be a comfort to know that it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley and under your orders." He's being like, wow, I wonder whose fault that would be if she should die. Yeah. "Oh, I am not at all afraid of her dying. People do not die of little trifling colds. She will be taken good care of. As long as she stays there, it is all very well. I would go and see her if I could have the carriage." Elizabeth, feeling really anxious, was determined to go to her, though the carriage was not to be had, and as she was no horsewoman, walking was her only alternative. She declared her resolution. "How can you be so silly?" cried her mother. "Not to think of such a thing! In all this dirt, you will not be fit to be seen when you get there." Okay guys, remember that during that time, it was very important that they looked presentable as they could possibly be, because there was like a show of not only how you carry yourself, it is also a show of some kind of respect to whoever you're visiting, okay? So like, we think, why do they care so much about appearances? It's because it's really kind of important, you know? It's really kind of important back in those days, yeah. "I shall be very fit to see Jane, which is all I want." "Is this a hint to me, Lizzie," said her father, "to send for the horses?" "No, indeed, I do not wish to avoid the walk. The distance is nothing. When one has a motive, only 3 miles, I shall be back by dinner." "I admire the activity of your benevolence," observed Mary, "but every impulse of feeling should be guided by reason, and in my opinion, exertion should always be in proportion to what is required." "We will go as far as Meryton with you," said Catherine and Lydia. Elizabeth accepted their company, and the 3 young ladies set off together. "Ah, okay." "If we make haste," said Lydia as they walked along, "perhaps we may see something of Captain Carter before he goes." She has a scheme, guys. She wants to see Captain Carter. It's not because she wants to be nice to her sister. It's because she wants to see, like, handsome guy. Excuse me. In Meryton they parted. The 2 youngest repaired to the lodgings of one of the officers' wives, and Elizabeth continued her walk alone, crossing field after field at a quick pace, jumping over stiles and springing over puddles with impatient activity, and finding herself at last within view of the house, with weary ankles, dirty stockings, and a face glowing with the warmth of exercise. She was shown into the breakfast parlor, where all but Jane were assembled, and where her appearance created a great deal of surprise. That she should have walked 3 miles so early in the day, in such dirty weather, and by herself, was almost incredible to Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley, and Elizabeth was convinced that they held her in contempt for it. She was received, however, very politely by them, and in their brother's manners there was something better than politeness. There was good humour and kindness. Mr. Darcy said very little, and Mr. Hurst nothing at all. The former was divided between admiration of the brilliancy which exercise had given to her complexion, and doubt as to the occasions justifying her coming so far alone. The latter was thinking only of his breakfast. Basically, Mr. Darcy was thinking like, oh man, exercise kind of looks good on her, and like, did she seriously have to like come this far alone? And then Mr. Hurst is just, wee music in his head. Dun 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 dun. Yeah, that's probably what he was thinking. Her inquiries after her sister were not very favorably answered. Miss Bennet had slept ill, and though up, was very feverish and not well enough to leave her room. Elizabeth was glad to be taken to her immediately, and Jane, who had only been withheld by the fear of giving alarm or inconvenience from expressing in her notes how much she longed for such a visit, was delighted at her entrance. She was not equal, however, to much conversation, and when Miss Bingley left them together, could attempt little besides expressions of gratitude for the extraordinary kindness she was treated with. Elizabeth silently attended her, so basically she just took care of her, She's just like, she didn't mention that she wanted her sister to come, but her sister came, so she's very touched. Very nice sister love. When breakfast was over, they were joined by the sisters, and Elizabeth began to like them herself when she saw how much affection and solicitude they showed for Jane. Okay, she's starting to warm up to them, which is very good, guys. The apothecary came and, having examined his patient, said, as might be supposed, that she had caught a violent cold, and that they must endeavour to get the better of it, advised her to return to bed, and promised her some draughts. The advice was followed readily, for the feverish symptoms increased, and her head ached acutely. Elizabeth did not quit her room for a moment, nor were the other ladies often absent. The gentlemen being out, they had in fact nothing to do elsewhere. Yeah, back in those days, there was nothing to do at night. They slept very early, okay? There was nothing to do at night. They didn't surf internet at night. The night was dark and like, whatever, let's just sleep. When the clock struck 3, Elizabeth felt that she must go and very unwillingly said so. Miss Bingley offered her the carriage, and she only wanted a little pressing to accept it, when Jane testified such concern in parting with her that Miss Bingley was obliged to convert the offer of the chaise to an invitation to remain at Netherfield for the present. Elizabeth most thankfully consented, and a servant was dispatched to Longbourn to acquaint the family with her stay and bring back a supply of clothes. Yeah, so basically he's like, okay, fine, I'll stay the night, I'll take care of you, okay? He's like, I don't want her to go, I want her to stay, I want my mermaid to stay. Yeah, so that's basically what happened. Okay, so we come to chapter 3. Not chapter 3, chapter 8. Oh my gosh, I legit just cut this number in half. Why am I like this? Okay, guys. Let's move on to chapter 8. Okay, so now we see that Jane is kind of got a little setback by falling sick, but for Elizabeth, you begin to see that the slight, tiny, really minuscule blossoming between her and Mr. Darcy, which I am absolutely weak for. So let us continue. Chapter 8. At 5 o'clock, the two ladies retired to dress, and at 6:30, Elizabeth was summoned to dinner. To the civil inquiries which they poured in, and amongst which she had the pleasure of distinguishing the much superior solicitude of Mr. Bingley's, she could not make a very favourable answer. Okay, got it. Jane was by no means better. The sisters, on hearing this, repeated 3 or 4 times how much they were grieved, how shocking it was to have a bad cold, and how excessively they disliked being ill themselves. Yeah, getting ill sucks, okay? Getting ill sucks. And then thought no more of the matter. Then their indifference towards Jane when not immediately before them restored Elizabeth to the enjoyment of her original dislike. She's like, I don't quite like. Yeah. Their brother, indeed, was the only one of the party whom she could regard with any complacency. His anxiety for Jane was evident, and his attentions to herself most pleasing, and it prevented her from feeling herself so much an intruder as she believed she was considered by the others. Because after all, she kind of turned up like uninvited, so she was an intruder kind of, but like, they've been very nice to her, so yeah. She had very little notice from any but him. Miss Bingley was engrossed by Mr. Darcy, her sister scarcely less so, and as for Mr. Hurst, by whom Elizabeth sat, he was an indolent man, who lived only to eat, drink, and play at cards, who, when he found her prefer a plain dish to a rag-out, had nothing to say to her. Food opinions, guys, food wars. When dinner was over, she returned directly to Jane, and Miss Bingley began abusing her as soon as she was out of the room. Her manners were pronounced to be very bad indeed, a mixture of pride and impertinence. She had no conversation, no style, no taste, no beauty. Mrs. Hurst thought the same and added, oh my god, so basically, like Miss Bingley is like, oh my gosh, I can't stand her, like, bad style, so prideful and things. Yeah. She has nothing, in short, to recommend her. But being an excellent walker, I shall never forget her appearance this morning. She really looked almost wild. She did indeed, Louisa. I could hardly keep my countenance. Very nonsensical to come at all. Why must she be scampering about the country because her sister had a cold? Her hair was so untidy, so blowsy. Yes, and her petticoat. I hope you saw her petticoat. 6 inches deep in mud, I am absolutely certain, and the gown which had been let down to hide it not doing its office. Your picture may be very exact, Louisa, said Bingley, but this was all lost upon me. I thought Miss Elizabeth Bennet looked remarkably well when she stepped into the room this morning. Her dirty petticoat quite escaped my notice. She's like, you girls are being a bit too dramatic. I didn't see anything. You observed it, Mr. Darcy, I am sure, said Miss Bingley, and I am inclined to think that you would not wish to see your sister make such an exhibition. Certainly not. To walk 3 miles or 4 miles or 5 miles or whatever it is above her ankles in dirt and alone, quite alone. What could she mean by it? It seems to me to show an abominable sort of conceited independence, a most country town indifference to decorum. It shows an affection for her sister that is very pleasing, said Bingley. I knew I could trust my man Bingley to speak up for her. All of you catty women. Where is the sisterly support, man? I'm afraid, Mr. Darcy, observed Miss Bingley in a half-whisper, that this adventure has rather affected your admiration of her fine eyes. Not at all, he replied. They were brightened by the exercise. She thought her more attractive after exercise, eh? A short pause followed this speech, and Mrs. Hurst began again. I have an excessive regard for Miss Jane Bennet. She is really a very sweet girl, and I wish with all my heart she were well settled. But with such a father and mother and such low connections, I am afraid there is no chance of it. I think I have heard you say that their uncle is an attorney in Meryton. Yes, and they have another who lives somewhere near Cheapside. That is capital, added her sister, and they both laughed heartily. If they had uncles enough to fill all Cheapside, cried Bingley, it would not make them one jot less agreeable. Oh my gosh, it's like, can you not? It's fine. But it must very materially lessen their chance of marrying men of any consideration in the world, replied Darcy. To this speech Bingley made no answer, but his sisters gave it a hearty assent and indulged in their mirth for some time at the expense of their dear friends' vulgar relations. Hey, that's terrible. You all are so two-faced. Then, Darcy, you're mean too. With a renewal of tenderness, however, they repaired to her room on leaving the dining parlour and sat with her till summoned to coffee. She was still very poorly, and Elizabeth would not quit her at all till late in the evening, when she had the comfort of seeing her sleep, and when it appeared to her rather right than pleasant that she should go downstairs herself. On entering the drawing-room, she found the whole party at loo and was immediately invited to join them. I think it's a card game, But suspecting them to be playing high, she declined it, and making her sister the excuse, said she would amuse herself for the short time she could stay below with a book. Mr. Hurst looked at her with astonishment. Do you prefer reading to cards? Said he. That is rather singular. I mean, same. I rather prefer reading to like playing cards. Miss Eliza Bennet, said Miss Bingley, despises cards. She's a great reader and has no pleasure in anything else. I deserve neither such praise nor such censure, cried Elizabeth. I am not a great reader and I have pleasure in many things. In nursing your sister, I am sure you have pleasure, said Bingley, and I hope it will soon be increased by seeing her quite well. Bingley is such a nice guy. He's so manly. He's manly. Good man. Yeah. Elizabeth thanked him from her heart and then walked towards a table where a few books were lying. He immediately offered to fetch her others, all that his library afforded. And I wish my collection were larger for your benefit and my own credit, but I am an idle fellow, and though I have not many, I have more than I ever looked into. Elizabeth assured him that she could suit herself perfectly with those in the room. I am astonished, said Miss Bingley, that my father should have left so small a collection of books. What a delightful library you have at Pemberley, Mr. Darcy. Nice. It ought to be good, he replied. It has been the work of many generations. Yo, do you guys remember like in Beauty and the Beast, like the huge library? Like, oh my gosh, I assume that's what Pemberley looked like because like in those days, literacy was hard to come by. Like you had to be really rich to get an education, much less collect books. So if you have a huge collection of books, it's a sign of wealth and prestige. And then you have added so much to it yourself. You are always buying books. I cannot comprehend the neglect of a family library in such days as these. Neglect? I am sure you neglect nothing that can add to the beauties of that noble place. Charles, when you build your house, I wish it may be half as delightful as Pemberley. I wish it may. But I would really advise you to make a purchase in that neighborhood and take Pemberley for a kind of model. There is not a finer country in England than Derbyshire. With all my heart, I will buy Pemberley itself if Darcy will sell it. I am talking of possibilities, Charles. Upon my word, Caroline, I should think it more possible to get Pemberley by purchase than by imitation. Oh my god. Very nice. Elizabeth was so much caught by what passed as to leave her very little attention for her book, and soon laying it wholly aside, she drew near the card table and stationed herself between Mr. Bingley and his eldest sister to observe the game. Is Miss Darcy much grown since the spring? Said Miss Bingley. Will she be as tall as I am? I think she will. She is now about Miss Elizabeth Bennet's height, or rather taller. How I long to see her again! I never met with anybody who delighted me so much. Such a countenance, such manners, and so extremely accomplished for her age. Her performance on the pianoforte is exquisite. It is amazing to me, said Bingley, how young ladies can have patience to be so very accomplished as they all are. All young ladies accomplished? My dear Charles, what do you mean? Damn. He is a good man. What do you mean? Yes, all of them, I think. They all paint tables, cover screens, and net purses. I scarcely know anyone who cannot do all this, and I am sure I never heard a young lady spoken of for the first time without being informed that she was very accomplished. Your list of the common extent of accomplishments, said Darcy, has too much truth. The word is applied to many a woman who deserves it no otherwise than by netting a purse or covering a screen. But I am very far from agreeing with you in your estimation of ladies in general. I cannot boast of knowing more than half a dozen in the whole range of my acquaintance that are really accomplished. Hey, shut up. Shh. Basically, he's like saying, I cannot boast of knowing more than 6 people that are actually accomplished. It's like really accomplished, not like you're accomplished, my accomplished. Nor I am sure, said Miss Bingley. Then, observed Elizabeth, you must comprehend a great deal in your idea of an accomplished woman. Yes, I do comprehend a great deal in it. Oh, certainly, cried his faithful assistant. faithful assistant. No one can be really esteemed accomplished who does not greatly surpass what is usually met with. A woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages to observe the world, and besides all this, she must possess a certain something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice, her address and expressions, or the word will be but half deserved. Oof. All this she must possess, added Darcy, and to all this she must yet add something more substantial in the improvement of her mind by extensive reading. I am no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I rather wonder now at your knowing any. Basically, it's like, I'm no longer surprised that you think you only know 6 women who can reach your standards, but like, I am impressed you know any women that reach your standards, is what they're saying. Are you so severe upon your own sex as to doubt the possibility of all this? I never saw such a woman. I never saw such capacity and taste and application and elegance as you described united. Basically, they have seen women who have accomplished part of what he described, but not all of them. Okay, they're speaking. Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley both cried out against the injustice of implied doubt, and were both protesting that they knew many women who answered this description when Mr. Hurst called them to order with bitter complaints of their inattention to what was going forward. As all conversation was thereby at an end, Elizabeth soon afterwards left the room. Elizabeth Bennet, said Miss Bingley, when the door was closed on her, is one of those young ladies who seek to recommend themselves to the other sex but undervaluing their own, and with many men I dare say it succeeds. But in my opinion, it is a paltry device, a very mean art. Rude. Undoubtedly, replied Darcy, to whom this remark was chiefly addressed. There is meanness in all the arts which ladies sometimes condescend to employ for captivation. Whatever bears affinity to cunning is despicable. Miss Bingley was not so entirely satisfied with this reply as to continue the subject. Oof. She not happy. Elizabeth joined them again only to say that her sister was worse and that she could not leave her. Bingley urged Mr. Jones's being sent for immediately, while his sisters, convinced that no country advice could be of any service, recommended and expressed to town for one of the most eminent physicians. This she would not hear of, but she was not so unwilling to comply with their brother's proposal, and it was settled that Mr. Jones should be sent for early in the morning, if Miss Bennet were not decidedly better. Bingley was quite uncomfortable. His sisters declared that they were miserable. They solaced their wretchedness, however, by duets after supper, while he could find no better relief to his feelings than by giving his housekeeper directions that every possible attention might be paid to the sick lady and her sister. Aww, he's a good guy, okay? So basically, he's like saying, send for this doctor, and it's like, nah, this country doctor's no use. Let's bring her to town for like the better physicians. And then, it's like, okay, we'll send for him early in the morning if she does not get better, okay? Yeah. So they're all uncomfortable, upset, and he's just anxious, an anxious guy. Get well soon, Jane. Get well soon. Chapter 9. Elizabeth passed the chief of the night in her sister's room, and in the morning had the pleasure of being able to send a tolerable answer to the inquiries which she very early received from Mr. Bingley by a housemaid, and some time afterwards from the 2 elegant ladies who waited on his sisters. In spite of this amendment, however, she requested to have a note sent to Longbourn, desiring her mother to visit Jane and form her own judgment of her situation. The note was immediately dispatched, and its contents as quickly complied with. Mrs. Bennet, accompanied by her 2 younger girls, reached Netherfield soon after their family breakfast. Had she found Jane in any apparent danger, Mrs. Bennet would have been very miserable. But being satisfied on seeing her that her illness was not alarming, she had no wish of her recovering immediately, as her restoration to health would probably remove her from Netherfield. Scheming mom. She would not listen, therefore, to her daughter's proposal of being carried home. Neither did the apothecary, who arrived about the same time, think it at all advisable. After sitting a little while with Jane, on Miss Bingley's appearance and invitation, the mother and 3 daughters all attended her into the breakfast parlour. Bingley met them with hopes that Mrs. Bennet had not found Miss Bennet worse than she had expected. "Indeed I have, sir," was her answer. "She is a great deal too ill to be moved. Mr. Jones says we must not think of moving her. We must trespass a little longer on your kindness." "Removed!" cried Bingley. "It must not be thought of. My sister, I am sure, will not hear of her removal." "You may depend upon it, madam," said Miss Bingley with cold civility, "that Miss Bennet shall receive every possible attention while she remains with us." Mrs. Bennet was profuse in the acknowledgments. She's like, just according to Keikaku. Yes. "I am sure," she added, if it was not for such good friends, I do not know what would become of her, for she is very ill indeed, and suffers a vast deal, though with the greatest patience in the world, which is always the way of her, for she has, without doubt, the sweetest temper I ever met with. I often tell my other girls they are nothing to her. You have a sweet room here, Mr. Bingley, and a charming prospect over that gravel walk. I do not know a place in the country that is equal to Netherfield. You will not think of quitting it in a hurry, I hope, though you have but a short lease." "Whatever I do is done in a hurry," replied he, "and therefore if I should resolve to quit Netherfield, I should probably be off in 5 minutes. Jesus Christ, this man's fast. At present, however, I consider myself as quite fixed here." "That is exactly what I should have supposed of you," said Elizabeth. "You do begin to compliment me, do you?" cried he, turning toward her. "Oh, yes, I understand you perfectly. I wish I might take this for a compliment, but to be so easily seen through, I am afraid is pitiful." "That is as it happens. It does not necessarily follow that a deep, intricate character is more or less estimable than such a one as yours." Oh man. Basically, what he's saying is like, I suppose that's kind of what I expected of you. It's like, I feel like it's a compliment that you saw it, but I feel like I got seen through, you know? It's like, it doesn't mean that a deep, intricate character is better than like your kind of character. And her mom's like, "Excuse me? Lizzie," cried her mother, "remember where you are and do not run in on the wild manner that you're suffered to do at home." "I did not know before," continued Bingley immediately, "that you were a study of character. It must be an amusing study." "Yes, but intricate characters are the most amusing. They have at least that advantage." "The country," said Darcy, "can in general supply but few subjects for such a study. In a country neighborhood, you move in a very confined and unvarying society." Okay. "But people themselves alter so much that there is something new to be observed in them forever." "Yes, indeed," cried Mrs. Bennet, offended by his manner of mentioning a country neighborhood. "I assure you there is quite as much of that going on in the country as in town." Everybody was surprised, and Darcy, after looking at her for a moment, turned silently away. Mrs. Bennet, who fancied she had gained a complete victory over him, continued her triumph. "I cannot see that London has any great advantage over the country, for my part, except the shops and public places. The country is a vast deal pleasanter, is not it, Mr. Bingley?" "When I am in the country," he replied, "I never wish to leave it, and when I am in town, it is pretty much the same. They have each their advantages, and I can be equally happy in either." "Aye, that is because you have the right disposition, but that gentleman," looking at Darcy, "seemed to think the country was nothing at all." "Indeed, mamma, you are mistaken," said Elizabeth, blushing for her mother. Embarrassed. "You quite mistook Mr. Darcy. He only meant that there was not such a variety of people to be met with in the country as in town, and which you must acknowledge to be true." "Certainly, my dear, nobody said there were, but as to not meeting with many people in this neighborhood, I believe there are few neighborhoods larger. I know we dine with 24 families. 24 families, that's quite a bit." Nothing but concern for Elizabeth could enable Bingley to keep his countenance. His sister was less delicate and directed her eye towards Mr. Darcy with a very expressive smile. Elizabeth, for the sake of saying something that might turn her mother's thoughts, now asked her if Charlotte Lucas had been in Longbourn since her coming away. Yes, she called yesterday with her father. What an agreeable man Sir William is. Mr. Bingley, is he not so? So much the man of fashion. So genteel and so easy. He has always something to say to everybody. That is my idea of good breeding, and those persons who fancy themselves very important and never open their mouths quite mistake the matter. Oof, he's insulting Darcy. Did Charlotte dine with you? No, she would go home. I fancy she was wanted about the mince pies. For my part, Mr. Bingley, I always keep servants that can do their own work. My daughters are brought up differently. But everybody is to judge for themselves, and the Lucases are a very good sort of girls, I assure you. It is a pity they are not handsome. Not that I think Charlotte so very plain, but then she is our particular friend. Stop backhand complimenting people. God damn it, that's like insulting backhand. She seems a very pleasant young woman, said Bingley. Oh dear, yes, but you must own she is very plain. Lady Lucas herself has often said so and envied me Jane's beauty. I do not like to boast of my own child, but to be sure, Jane, one does not often see anybody better looking. It is what everybody says. I do not trust my own partiality. When she was only 15, there was a gentleman at my brother Gardiner's in town so much in love with her that my sister-in-law was sure he would make her an offer before we came away. But, however, he did not. Perhaps he thought her too young. However, he wrote some verses on her, and very pretty they were. And so ended his affection, said Elizabeth impatiently. She's like, yeah, and that was it. There has been many a one, I fancy, overcome in the same way. I wonder who discovered efficacy of poetry in driving away love. I have been used to consider poetry as the food of love, said Darcy. Oop, first argument, hehe. Of a fine, stout, healthy love it may. Everything nourishes what is strong already. But if it be only a slight, thin sort of inclination, I am convinced that one good sonnet will starve it entirely away. Well, time to bring out the Shakespeare then. Darcy only smiled, and the general pause which ensued made Elizabeth tremble lest her mother should be exposing herself again. She longed to speak, but could think of nothing to say, and after a short while, Mrs. Bennet began repeating her thanks to Mr. Bingley for his kindness to Jane, with an apology for troubling him also with Lizzie. Mr. Bingley was unaffectedly civil in his answer, and forced his younger sister to be civil also, and say what the occasion required. She performed her part indeed without much graciousness, but Mrs. Bennet was satisfied, and soon afterwards ordered her carriage. Upon this signal, the youngest of her daughters put herself forward. The two girls had been whispering to each other during the whole visit, and the result of it was that the youngest should tax Mr. Bingley with having promised on his first coming into the country to give a ball at Netherfield. Lydia was a stout, well-grown girl of 15 with a fine complexion and a good-humored countenance, a favorite with a mother whose affection had brought her into public at an early age. Oh, she's only 15, that's so young. She had high animal spirits and a sort of natural self-consequence, which the attentions of the officers to whom her uncle's good dinners and her own easy manners recommended her had increased into assurance. She was very equal, therefore, to address Mr. Bingley on the subject of the ball, and abruptly reminded him of his promise, adding that it would be the most shameful thing in the world if he did not keep it. His answer to this sudden attack was delightful to their mother's ear. I am perfectly ready, I assure you, to keep my engagement, and when your sister is recovered, you shall, if you please, name the very day of the ball. But you would not wish to be dancing while she is ill. Lydia declared herself satisfied. Oh yes, it would be much better to wait till Jane was well, and by that time most likely Captain Carter will be at Meryton again, and when you have given your ball, she added, I shall insist on their giving one also. I shall tell Colonel Foster it will be quite a shame if he does not. They really like balls, you know. Mrs. Bennet and her daughters then departed, and Elizabeth returned instantly to Jane, leaving her own and her relations' behavior to the remarks of the two ladies and Mr. Darcy. The latter of whom, however, could not be prevailed on to join in their censure of her, in spite of all Miss Bingley's witticisms on fine eyes. Basically, Mr. Darcy is still very, very much in love. He's like, oh, I'm still in love with her. She is a fine dynamite girl. Okay, now we have reached chapter 10, and I believe I can wrap up chapter 10 by today. Okay, and then depending on how you guys like it, do you guys like this kind of streams? Because I know I don't interact with you guys too much in these types of streams, so I'm not sure if you guys like it. I mean, I certainly enjoy myself reading out these stories and kind of like explaining things that you guys may not understand. So well, if you like this kind of stream, do let me know. Okay, then I'll see if I can change the way I do things, or maybe like read other stories. Hopefully stories that are in the public domain though, so that so that I do not step on anyone's toes. You know, copyright is such a fickle thing. Yeah. Okay, to continue. Chapter 10. The day passed much as the day before had done. Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley had spent some hours of the morning with the invalid, who continued, though slowly, to mend, and in the evening Elizabeth joined the party in the drawing-room. The loo table, however, did not appear. Mr. Darcy was writing, and Miss Bingley, seated near him, was watching the progress of his letter, and repeatedly calling off his attention by messages to his sister. Mr. Hurst and Mr. Bingley were at piquet, and Mrs. Hurst was observing their game. Elizabeth took up some needlework and was sufficiently amused in attending to what passed between Darcy and his companion. The perpetual commendations of the lady either on his handwriting, or on the evenness of his lines, or on the length of his letter, with the perfect unconcern with which praises were received, formed a curious dialogue. It was exactly in unison with her opinion of each. How delighted Miss Darcy will be to receive such a letter? He made no answer. You write uncommonly fast. You are mistaken. I write rather slowly. How many letters you must have occasion to write in the course of a year? Letters of business too. How odious I should think them. It is fortunate then that they fall to my lot instead of to yours. Pray tell your sister that I long to see her. I have already told her so once, by your desire. I'm afraid you do not like your pen. Let me mend it for you. I mend pens remarkably well, thank you, but I always mend my own. How can you contrive to write so even? He was silent. Tell your sister I am delighted to hear of her improvement on the harp, and pray let her know that I am quite in raptures with a beautiful little design for a table, and I think it infinitely superior to Miss Grantley's. Will you give me leave to defer your raptures till I write again? At present I have not room to do them justice. Oh, it is of no consequence. I shall see her in January. But do you always write such charming long letters to her, Mr. Darcy? They are generally long, but whether always charming, it is not for me to determine. He is so done with her. It is a rule with me that the person who can write a long letter with ease cannot write ill. That will not do for a compliment to Darcy, Caroline, cried her brother, because he does not write with ease. He studies too much for words of 4 syllables. Do not you, Darcy? My style of writing is very different from yours. Oh, cried Miss Bingley, Charles writes in the most careless way imaginable. He leaves out half his words and blots the rest. My ideas flow so rapidly that I have not time to express them, by which my letters sometimes convey no ideas at all to my correspondents. Your humility, Mr. Bingley, said Elizabeth, must disarm reproof. Nothing is more deceitful, said Darcy, than the appearance of humility. It is often only carelessness of opinion, and sometimes an indirect boast. And which of the two do you call my little recent piece of modesty? The indirect boast, for you are really proud of your defects in writing, because you consider them as proceeding from a rapidity of thought and carelessness of execution, which, if not estimable, you think at least highly interesting. The power of doing anything with quickness is always much prized by the possessor, and often without any attention to the imperfection of the performance. When you told Mrs. Bennet this morning that if you ever resolved on quitting Netherfield, you should be gone in 5 minutes, you meant it to be sort of a panegyric of compliment to yourself, and yet what is there so very laudable in the precipice which must leave very unnecessary business undone and can be of no real advantage to yourself or anyone else? Whew, that's a pretty long solo. Nay, cried Bingley. This is too much to remember at the night all the foolish things that were said in the morning, and yet upon my honor I believed what I said of myself to be true, and I believe it at this moment. At least, therefore, I did not assume the character of needless precipice merely to show off before the ladies. Ah, I dare say you believed it, but I am by no means convinced that you would be gone with such celerity. Your conduct would be quite as dependent on chance as that of any man I know. And if, as you were mounting your horse, a friend were to say, Bingley, you had better stay till next week, you would probably do it, you would probably not go, and at another would might stay a month. It's like you don't actually mean it when you say you'll leave. You have only proved by this, cried Elizabeth, that Mr. Bingley did not do justice to his own disposition. You have shown him off now much more than he did himself. I am exceedingly gratified, said Bingley, by your converting what my friend says into a compliment on the sweetness of my temper. But I am afraid you are giving it a turn which that gentleman did by no means intend, for he would certainly think the better of me, if under such a circumstance I were to give a flat denial and ride off as fast as I could. Would Mr. Darcy then consider the rashness of your original intention as atoned for by your obstinacy in adhering to it? Upon my word, I cannot exactly explain the matter. Darcy must speak for himself. You expect me to account for opinions which you choose to call mine, but which I have never acknowledged. Allowing the case, however, to stand according to your representation, you must remember, Miss Bennet, that the friend who is supposed to desire his return to the house and the delay of his plan has merely desired it, asked it, without offering one argument in favor of its propriety. Remember that the friend supposed to yield readily, easily to the persuasion of a friend is no merit with you. To yield without conviction is no compliment to the understanding of either. Lemao? Wait, who's talking now? I got confused as well. Oh god. You appear to me, Mr. Darcy, to allow nothing for the influence of friendship and affection. A regard for the requester would often make one readily yield to a request without waiting for arguments to reason one into it. I am not particularly speaking of such a case as you have supposed about Mr. Bingley. We may as well wait, perhaps, till the circumstance occurs before we discuss the discretion of his behavior thereupon. But in general and ordinary cases between friend and friend, where one of them is desired by the other to change a resolution of no very great moment, should you think ill of that person for complying with the desire without waiting to be argued into it? Will it not be advisable, before we proceed on this subject, to arrange with rather more precision the degree of importance which is to appertain to this request, as well as the degree of intimacy subsisting between the parties? By all means, cried Bingley, let us hear all the particulars, not forgetting the comparative height and size, for that will have more weight in the argument. Miss Bennet, then you may be aware of. I assure you that if Darcy were not such a great tall fellow, in comparison with myself, I should not pay him half as much deference. I declare I do not know a more awful object than Darcy, on particular occasions, and in particular places, at his own houses, especially, and of a Sunday evening when he has nothing to do. Lemao! He's essentially saying he's like, I do not know anyone more awful than him on certain occasions, certain places, at his own house, and in the Sunday evening, and when he's bored. Mr. Darcy smiled, but Elizabeth thought she could perceive that he was rather offended, and therefore checked her laugh. Miss Bingley warmly resented the indignity he had received in an expostulation with her brother for talking such nonsense. I see your design, Bingley, said his friend. It is like an argument and want to silence this. Perhaps I do. Arguments are too much like disputes. If you and Miss Bennet will defer yours till I am out of the room, I shall be very thankful, and then you may say whatever you like of me. What you ask, said Elizabeth, is no sacrifice on my side, and Mr. Darcy had much better finish his letter. Mr. Darcy took her advice and did finish his letter. When that business was over, he applied to Miss Bingley and Elizabeth for the indulgence of some music. Miss Bingley moved with alacrity to the pianoforte, and after a polite request that Elizabeth would lead the way, which the other as politely and more earnestly negatived, she seated herself. Mrs. Hurst sang with her sister, and while they were thus employed, Elizabeth could not help observing, as she turned over some music books that lay on the instrument, how frequently Mr. Darcy's eyes were fixed on her. She noticed he's looking at her. She hardly knew how to suppose that she could be an object of admiration to so great a man, and yet that he should look at her because he disliked her was still more strange. She could only imagine, however, at last, that he drew his notice because there was something about her more wrong and reprehensible, according to his ideas of right, than in any other person present. The supposition did not pain her. She liked him too little to care for his approbation. After playing some Italian songs, Miss Bingley varied the charm by a lively Scotch air, and soon afterwards Mr. Darcy, drawing near Elizabeth, said to her, "Do you not feel a great inclination, Miss Bennet, to see such an opportunity of dancing a reel?" She smiled but made no answer. She did not answer him. He repeated the question with some surprise at her silence. "Oh," said she, "I heard you before, but I could not immediately determine what to say in reply. You wanted me, I know, to say yes, that you might have the pleasure of despising my taste, but I always delight in overthrowing those kind of schemes and cheating a person of the premeditated contempt. I have therefore made up my mind to tell you that I do not want to dance a reel at all, and now despise me if you dare." "Indeed, I do not dare." Elizabeth, having rather expected to affront him, was amazed at his gallantry. But there was a mixture of sweetness and archness in her manner which made it difficult for her to affront anybody, and Darcy had never been so bewitched by any woman as he was by her. Damn! He really believed that were it not for the inferiority of her connection, he should be in some danger. I can't believe it. He really be like insulting her in the same breath as saying that he likes her. Miss Bingley suspected enough to be jealous, and her great anxiety for the recovery of her dear friend Jane received some assistance from a desire for getting rid of Elizabeth. She often tried to provoke Darcy into disliking her guest by talking of their supposed marriage and planning his happiness in such an alliance. "I hope," said she, as they were walking together in the shrubbery the next day, "you will give your mother-in-law a few hints when this desirable event takes place as to the advantage of holding a tongue, and if you can compass it to do cure the younger girls of running after the officers, and if I may mention so delicate a subject, endeavour to check that little something bordering on conceit and impertinence which your lady possesses. Have you anything else to propose for my domestic felicity?" Okay, what's felicity again? I keep forgetting. Felicity. Meaning. What does felicity mean? It means intense happiness. It means the ability to find appropriate expression of one's thoughts. How good are you at like, expressing your thoughts in words? Domestic felicity means happiness, yeah. "Oh, yes, do let portraits of your uncle and Aunt Phillips be placed in the gallery at Pemberley. Put them next to your great-uncle the judge. They are in the same profession, only in different lines. As for Elizabeth's picture, you must not attempt to have it taken, for what painter could do justice to those beautiful eyes?" It would not be easy indeed to catch their expression, but the color and shape and the eyelashes, so remarkably fine, might be copied. At that moment, they were met from another walk by Mrs. Hurst and Elizabeth herself. "I did not know that you intended to walk," said Miss Bingley, in some confusion, lest they had been overheard. "You used us abominably ill," answered Mrs. Hurst, "running away without telling us you were coming out." Then, taking the disengaged arm of Mr. Darcy, she left Elizabeth to walk by herself. The path just admitted 3. Mr. Darcy felt a rudeness and immediately said, "This walk is not wide enough for a party. We had better go into the avenue." But Elizabeth, who had not the least inclination to remain with them, laughingly answered, No, stay where you are. You are charmingly grouped and appear to uncommon advantage. The picturesque would be spoilt by admitting a fourth. Goodbye." She then ran gaily off, rejoicing as she rambled about, in the hope of being at home again in a day or two. She's like, "Yay, I get to go home away from this place, woo!" Jane was already so much recovered as to intend leaving her room for a couple of hours that evening. Yay! And we have wrapped up chapter 10, guys. We went through 3 chapters of reading today. Woo, that was almost 3 hours, right? 2.5 hours? Yeah, about like literally exactly like 2.5 hours. Holy shit. Yay! Guys, how was it? Yay! I love Pride and Prejudice. It is indeed one of the best books I have read, and it may not be for everyone, I admit. Okay, it's definitely not for everyone, but like I love it so much. Like, you know, the way the romance plays out, the way they you can learn a lot from the genteel manners. You can learn a lot from the specifics of that time and things. Like, there's a reason Jane Austen is such a classic in English literature. So, well, guys, this is actually free to read. So if you want to read ahead of me, just feel free to search a Pride and Prejudice ebook. I'm sure you'll be able to find a source. Just download the PDF. If you have an e-reader, just like load that shit up. If you have an e-reader, just load that shit up into your e-reader. And no excuses for not reading, guys. No excuses for not reading. Hey, right. Okay, so this will be it for my streams this week. Okay, this will be it for my streams this week, because this weekend Saturday will be my grandma's birthday. So Grandma Shib, I have to go. Sunday I'll probably be busy doing some more moving things, because there's still a lot of moving things to do. Yeah, there's a lot of moving things to do. So next week, I'm not even sure how much I can stream, actually. So I will have to update you guys on that. Alright? But yeah, this will be the last scheduled stream of this week, okay? I've watched the movie a few times, but never read it. Hi, Jake! Hello! Yeah, the movies... Interestingly, I'm the opposite from you. I have read this a few times, but I have never watched the movie. At least I've only watched, like, core parts of movies. I did watch because I was learning film adaptations. So I did watch one of the adaptations called Pride and Prejudice. It's an adaptation that is set in India. It's super cool. Pride and Prejudice, like, it's really good. There was really good songs. I would say it's a pretty loyal adaptation of it, but of course there are some changes, cultural changes here and everything. But like, it was super cool. I highly recommend it. Highly recommend people watching it. Yeah, it was such a fun study to do. Thanks, Reddy. Thank you for being here, Jake. Thank you for joining the chat. Okay, guys. Well, I know this is very different from my usual content, so I'm very grateful to all of you for staying, and for any newcomers, I'm grateful to all of you for like coming and joining. And if you like this content or you want to see me more, feel free to subscribe and like and subscribe below. Yeah, I'm saying this not because I'm like, you must like and subscribe, but because sometimes it slips our minds. There are plenty of times I forget, and like, I don't want you to miss that chance, okay? Yes, so I will see you next time, most likely next Friday, but I cannot promise. If you want to follow, if you want to be updated on my activities, feel free to follow me on my Twitter, and I will try and update the YouTube community tab as well. So yeah, I will see you then next week, okay? I will see you guys next week. And until then, guys, goodbye. つやり。Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.